In this episode of President Curtis, an old clause written by Napoleon puts part of the United States at risk. Curtis and Banks will have to find a very unusual relic before the French do, while vampires, werewolves, and Napoleon's followers turn the whole situation into a completely absurd battle to reclaim Louisiana. The episode begins in the White House, specifically in the attic, where Curtis and Banks are searching for some old wooden throwing stars. As they go through everything stored up there, Curtis even mentions that George Washington had a wooden nipple, using that as an opportunity to point out that back then, people could apparently get away with inventing just about anything. Among all the strange objects are the throwing stars Curtis is looking for, which according to him could actually be deadlier than many modern weapons. Clearly the perfect piece of information for a seminar aimed at at-risk youth. Just then, O'Doyle arrives carrying some spicy wings that immediately catch Curtis's attention. Since he's his boss, Curtis practically demands that O'Doyle share some with him. The problem is, these aren't normal wings. They contain molten metals, and if Curtis were to eat one, he would probably die instantly. When O'Doyle realizes there's no convincing him to stop asking, he finally throws the wings straight into the trash. Only then does Curtis lose interest in trying them. As they continue going through everything stored in the attic, Banks finds something far more important: the original receipt for the Louisiana Purchase from France, a document that had been missing for more than 200 years. What makes the discovery even more surprising is that the land acquired in that purchase now makes up all or part of nearly 15 US states. However, Banks notices something strange in the document. Napoleon had included a clause specifically forbidding anyone from entering a cave located in the third Rocky Mountain, and right beneath it is none other than Thomas Jefferson's signature. Curtis doesn't seem particularly concerned, but Banks refuses to let it go. After all, she isn't about to accept that some long-dead foreign dictator gets to decide which parts of the United States Americans are allowed to visit. Just then, Curtis finally finds what he was looking for: George Washington's throwing stars, one representing each of the original colonies. Later, a helicopter headed for the Rocky Mountains is waiting only for Banks. She disables the location services on her device so the president won't be able to track her movements. Once the helicopter takes off, Banks hangs onto the underside before eventually parachuting down to investigate the area on her own. After landing, she comes across a rather suspicious sign stating that Americans are strictly forbidden from entering. Banks begins making her way into the mountain and uses a flashlight to navigate through one of the caves. But not long after entering, she discovers that Curtis and O'Doyle are there too. She's pretty disappointed, considering neither of them had supposedly been interested in finding out what the French were hiding. O'Doyle explains that he saw her putting on her special suit, and after that, they decided to follow her. As they explore the cave, Curtis assumes they probably won't find anything important. All he can see are drawings of shoulders and ankles, leading him to the ridiculous conclusion that maybe this was simply the cave Napoleon used to go fool around in. But as Curtis keeps walking, he accidentally steps on a button that opens a hidden compartment. Out comes a figure of Napoleon riding a wooden horse, which begins playing an old recorded message. The translation basically warns them that if they thought France had been cheated in the Louisiana Purchase, they were completely wrong. Now that they've violated the agreement by entering the cave, Napoleon declares a border forfeiture, a clause that would allow the seller to reclaim the land after a breach of contract. In other words, France has just reclaimed the entire Louisiana territory. But the message still has one last surprise. The Napoleon figure launches a syphilis bomb, immediately infecting all three of them. Luckily, they solve the problem in the most absurd way possible. They simply take a pill and are completely cured. Banks realizes that Napoleon had tried to kill Jefferson in order to reclaim the Louisiana territory. O'Doyle suggests destroying all the evidence of what happened, but Curtis refuses. In the end, they decide to simply leave. Although before they go, Curtis asks O'Doyle to take one of the paintings from the cave so he can add it to his personal collection. What none of them realize is that by taking something that didn't belong to them, they activated a hidden system. A chain reaction begins deep inside the mountain and eventually reaches a group of birds, which trigger an ancient protocol in France. The signal travels deep underground, where a group of Napoleon's followers has spent years waiting for this exact moment, the day they would finally have to reclaim Louisiana. Meanwhile, back at the White House, Special Agent Chomps tries to convince Curtis that being a werewolf can actually make him a much better agent. The problem is that just a few days earlier, he ended up eating another agent's leg, which obviously doesn't look particularly good on his resume. At that moment, Curtis receives a call from the head of France's real estate acquisition department. Apparently, the French government is interested in reclaiming certain American territories. After the call ends, Banks explains that in order to begin a territorial acquisition process, a representative of the original seller has to notify the current owner. That means the French already know that they violated the agreement written into the document. The problem is that Napoleon has been dead for a very long time. However, apparently there is one completely absurd way he could still retain legal rights over the land: through his penis. According to the 19th century Napoleonic Code, being considered French basically came down to being a Frenchman. So, following that utterly ridiculous logic, Napoleon's penis technically still represents Napoleon himself. Fortunately, that rather unusual historical artifact has been missing for years, and nobody knows exactly where it is. Curtis, however, knows some people who might be able to help them find it before the French do, so they immediately get to work, although they decide to leave Chomps behind, mainly because Curtis doesn't want to risk becoming the next person to lose a leg. That same night, they arrive at a massive mansion, where they are greeted by a vampire. But rather than being a threat, he turns out to be an old friend of Curtis. His name is Salem, and he belongs to a group of vampires that, according to him, has helped every US president since the days of George Washington. Curtis explains what they are looking for. Quite literally, a black market item. All they know is that Napoleon's penis was purchased years ago by an extremely wealthy collector, but they have no idea who that collector is. To convince the vampires to help them, Curtis shows them the payment he prepared: a huge supply of extremely rare blood, including atheist blood and O-negative blood. Curtis offers them half up front and promises to give them the rest once they manage to locate Napoleon's penis. Meanwhile, Agent Chomps visits Dr. Finch and explains that despite wearing the collar that is supposed to keep his instincts under control, he recently lost control again and ended up eating a construction worker's leg. Finch explains that the problem lies in the very nature of a werewolf. Whenever he senses danger, his instincts simply tell him to protect his pack, no matter who ends up paying the price. But Chomps doesn't want to keep hurting innocent people. His goal is to become a werewolf who can actually use his abilities to do good, so he decides to undergo a new procedure in the hope of finally gaining control over his impulses.
There's your penis, Mr. President, inside the private collection of Armand Rousseau. Napoleon's penis is in his famous organs wing.
Meanwhile, the president and the vampires head out in search of Napoleon's penis, which is currently part of Armand Rousseau's private collection. Banks asks Curtis if he really plans to steal it, and he confirms that he does, even asking her to disable the alarms. Banks, however, sticks to the rules and flat out refuses to take part in the robbery. Before they can get inside, Napoleon's followers arrive, determined to defend his legacy and reclaim what they believe rightfully belongs to them. Without wasting any time, they charge straight at Curtis and the vampires, kicking off a fight. Curtis orders Banks and O'Doyle to go straight for the penis while he and Monty stay behind to deal with Napoleon's followers. Elsie goes inside with them and holds off the enemies trying to stop them, giving Banks enough time to locate and recover the object.
I got it! I got the penis!
Correction, j'ai le pénis.
When Banks finally comes out carrying Napoleon's penis, Curtis celebrates, declaring that both the artifact and the Louisiana territory now belong to them. However, Monty reveals that the whole thing was a trap. He tells Curtis that, like a typical American, the only things he understands are money and lasers, and reminds him that Jefferson never fully kept the promises made to Louisiana either. Over time, the territory was divided into several states, and according to Monty, Louisiana has always been the one that got the short end of the deal. Monty then admits that he and Dulac made an agreement. If they present Napoleon's penis in court and manage to have it legally recognized, the vampires will be granted free passage through Louisiana. And as they continue searching for blood and spreading across the country, they could eventually make their way all the way to Nebraska. Just when everything seems lost and the vampires are about to bite Curtis, Banks, and O'Doyle, Elsie shows up to save them.
Before you say anything, I had no idea about the double cross. Those guys don't tell me. it.
Oh, good. The vampire who's not in the group chat.
She insists she had no idea about the betrayal and immediately sides with Curtis. Meanwhile, Finch continues helping Chomps modify his collar so his werewolf instincts won't cause him to attack innocent people. The new system will automatically release a suppressant whenever it detects that he's starting to lose control. At that moment, Curtis calls and asks for Chomps' help, since he needs his werewolf strength to take on the vampires. At the same time, O'Doyle starts preparing for the fight and asks Banks for some pennies so he can swallow them and use his own body to produce wooden-tipped bullets.
Is he always this weird?
Usually.
You betrayed your own people.
To save your ungrateful ass. Twice, by the way. Saved your ass twice, but who's counting?
You, obviously.
Listen, if they can throw away loyalties that easily, they aren't my people.
Elsewhere, the vampires arrive at the courthouse, planning to have Napoleon's penis legally recognized as a citizen. Since they can't enter without being invited, they ask the security guard to let them inside. Completely confused, the man tells them that he already did, but the vampires insist that they need an explicit invitation for it to actually count. While all of this is happening, Chomps manages to transform into a wolf and races off to help Curtis. He needs to hurry, because the vampires have already taken out the police officer and made it all the way to the judge. Dulac also shows up and forces the judge to declare Napoleon's penis a legal US citizen. Monty warns him that he'd better cooperate, because Dulac has far less patience than they do. Terrified, the judge agrees, on the condition that they don't hurt him. However, to make the ruling official, he has to bring down his gavel. Just as he's about to do it, Curtis arrives in time to stop him, and with Elsie by his side, once again takes on Dulac and the rest of the vampires.
See? It's motivational.
Meanwhile, Michael stops by to see Finch and grab some donuts. He casually mentions that he just upgraded to the ad-free pro version of Dribble. That conversation suddenly reminds Finch of one very important detail. The system installed in Chomps' collar is still running the ad-supported version.
Is your puppy cold in the snow? Try Puppy Pal's Paw Booties, because innocent paws deserve to be pampered.
In the middle of the fight, the vampires keep demanding that the judge bring down the gavel while Curtis goes head-to-head with Monty. Desperate, Curtis yells for them to release the wolf, but Chomps' collar starts playing an ad at the worst possible moment, preventing him from completing his transformation. Chomps ends up falling from a great height and is seriously injured.
See, this is exactly why you'd suck at being a vampire. Of all the presidents I've seen, you have to be the worst!
Even so, he manages to gather enough strength to raise a weapon and fire an arrow straight into Monty's head. Curtis is thrilled to discover that Chomps apparently survived the fall, although Chomps quickly explains that, technically, he did die. The only thing he managed to do was concentrate all of his werewolf regeneration into one of his arms so he could make that final shot. Eventually, sunrise arrives and Elsie says goodbye to Banks and O'Doyle. Before she leaves, O'Doyle tries asking her out, pointing out that since she's a vampire, she literally has all eternity to spare. Elsie happily agrees, but O'Doyle immediately starts reconsidering exactly what he just signed up for. He clarifies that he definitely wants to see her again, just preferably not at his place or anywhere near the White House. It would probably be better if he simply contacts her whenever he wants to meet up. After they say goodbye, Dulac mourns the destruction of Napoleon's penis. Curtis tries to comfort her by saying that if Napoleon were still alive and had to die, he probably would have wanted to go out that way, trampled on the battlefield. Of course, Curtis immediately ruins any chance of reconciliation by reminding her that both she and all of her people are now officially banned from the country. The next day, Mark Luke receives a call from Curtis, who informs him that any French claim to American territory has officially been rejected. Curtis even tells him that the only part of America France is allowed to own is his ass. Mark fires back that, considering French cuisine, the president's ass could probably be turned into quite the delicacy. The two start arguing until Banks steps in before the conversation can escalate any further. Later, they discover that Chomps somehow managed to survive, which makes Curtis extremely happy. To celebrate, O'Doyle makes wings for everyone, although they turn out to be absolutely terrible. For some reason, that only makes the whole situation even funnier to them. Finally, Curtis reveals the secret messages he had been exchanging with Monty, bringing the episode to an end.